Hi there, so welcome to Unit 11. Unit 11 is made up of two different themes. We're going to look at smaller themes, which is the dissemination of findings. We've come to the end of our road, so you need to think about what happens once you finish a study and what's the process then. And the second one is Introduction to Theory. So that's creating a link to your course EDL6140, which you will do later on in the program. As I've said to you, sometimes it's not logical because we should talk about theory in this course, but we don't because it's quite complex and the course on theory is much further on. But I do want to take the time to at least fill the gap a little bit and indicate what theory is in broad terms, why it's important, how it fits into the process that we described about research. And that then gives you that opening into the 614 course. When you go there, you get there and you have a direct organic connection between the two. So in the intro, I'm going to talk about dissemination of findings, and in collaborate session, we are going to talk, collaborate session 11, we'll talk about theory. Then collaborate session 12 is it's a wrap up. So it's mostly housekeeping. We go back to the course objectives, we tackle any remaining questions, we talk about the remaining submissions, if they, how long you have, etc., and your grades, etc. So the content really finishes with Unit 11 in terms of real new content, and the rest is housekeeping. I'm not putting the slides up just in the interest of time because I've got it on a separate computer. But if you'd like to open the slide deck while you listen to this video, you're going to have be able to follow in the same way. So the objectives today, we're going to look at this notion of disseminating findings. You'll see that it's a little more complex than we might think, particularly as young scholars. You might think that that's it, the job stops when I finish the study. We need to be a little more nuanced and consider this again in context and see that actually our job doesn't stop there. I'm going to bring you back to this notion that when we started, I said that we don't write in a vacuum, we write for readership. You actually usually choose your theme as you've done because you've seen in the news and you've seen in educational newsletters and website, etc., that certain stakeholders are interested in the question that you've selected. So at the end, it's sort of a loop. You go back to that readership and you make sure that your findings reach that readership. And that's an active part of research too, and one that you cannot ignore, you need to be aware of. Before we get into that, I did want to talk to you a little bit as a wrap up on the critical review that you're carrying out now. That this process of peer review is done in a very similar way in terms of books. So we also review books, we don't just review journal articles. Now, the list of what you see in a book chapter is not always exactly the same structure as in a study because some books don't actually use data collection. They actually sometimes are more of a position piece, but they will still usually have something called the methodological stance, right? So the author still is going to give you an idea of where they stand in terms of methodology, generally, not because they're collecting data, but in terms of how they're positioning their reflection in the book chapter. People don't just write from the top of the hat; they actually still write from a perspective. So, are they writing to you as practitioners, reflecting on their practice? That be very keen to phenomenology. Are they writing to you from a theoretical position? Then the theory piece is going to be very strong, and the methodology not so important. Are they maybe analyzing secondary data that they are seeing in the news or etc.? That would be sort of a more standard qualitative discourse analysis, sort of looking at commenting almost on things that are already in the public domain. So you may not have a strong phenomenological sort of piece because it's not a methodological process, but it's still a methodological orientation in how you write a book. And then you have the findings in the same way, not findings, but sort of observation, conclusions, and then the outcomes and the repercussions. So the process you followed is very similar, and certainly the lit review would be there, intro and context would be there. That would be exactly identical for a book chapter. And by the way, some book chapters do collect data. It's the exception rather than the rule. But some people do choose to actually publish their studies in the form of a book chapter. It happens to. So reviewing a book is interesting for you because as graduate students, and most of you are classroom practitioners, but you're making your way to becoming young academics and having two hats basically. As young scholars, young academics, you have to start developing your CV in terms of publications. It's obviously a big jump, and although we've learned how to do a study, it is possible that you finish the master's and you don't yet feel that you have the capacity to tackle a full question, a full study, and to publish a study. Again, it might be because you don't have access to funding, as we've seen, that can limit you. It can also be because of time, because you're working full time. You may think that you don't have really the time to do a study on your own. So there may be many reasons why you want to publish, but you can't quite within the parameters of your program. One way of getting a publication on your CV is to do a book review. It's very important because often young scholars don't realize that it actually counts as a publication. So it actually gives you a lot of visibility for minimal amount of work. You don't do data collection, you don't have to do ethics, there's really nothing major to do. It's 1,000 words, and it gets you into a journal, and it gets listed into your CV as a publication. So it's a very important step, and it's one that I really recommend. Now, you're obviously in the first course of your MA. You may feel, oh, he's saying this, but it's too daunting. I'm not going to do it. But I really could not more firmly encourage you to consider it. First of all, consider it now, because 2 years on an MA, I know as you start, you think this is a long, long way away. This is 2 years' time. All graduate students always say, "Oh my God, where have these 2 years gone past?" You will turn around soon, and you'll be at the end of your studies. It's too late at the end to try and start this process. So at the end, you don't want to find yourself at the end of a master's program where you would wish that you'd done a book review, but you just haven't got around to doing it. It is a slow process. Everything in academia is slow. So by the time you volunteer for book review, by the time you get selected, by the time they send you a book, then they can normally give you 3 months to do the book review. You send it in, it's reviewed. No, it's not double peer reviewed, it's reviewed by the editor. And then on the basis of that review, it's then published. This could be a process that takes about a year and a half. So that's why you should try and look into it now, so that by the end of the master's, you could have a book review in. I again cannot recommend it strongly enough. I have given the same advice when I was in the masters and said, come on, beef up your CV, get a publication in, get a book review in. And I did. And when I was a young master student, I did quite a lot of book review, and they come in really handy in beefing up your CV. So I think you really should do. It does wonders for your confidence as well to get published when it's something that really you don't have to be too scared about, because you are being critical and analytical, but on someone else's work. You're not actually doing data collection, so it's not as scary as the rest. So I recommend that you do. So this is just a parenthesis, but this was a wrap up on Unit 10 on critical review. I've given you a couple of links. Most journals will look for book review. Most journals actually include 1 or 2, sometimes 3 book reviews per issue. So you have a lot of opportunities for publication. To be honest, as much as we're screened and filtered and sometimes denied publication in journals when it comes to studies, journals are desperate for book reviews. So the odds are in your favor, because really a lot of these journals can't actually fill the quota and can't find book reviews quickly enough to fill the space. There are different ways you can go about it, and you will see that in the 2 examples I've given you. You have some journals which will require that you register, and then you find a book that you like that fits within the ambit and the parameters of the journal, and then you send it in for as a proposal, and they say yes, and then you write the book review, and then you send it to them. So that is one way. It's not the most usual way. I've never done it this way, but it is possible to do it this way. Otherwise, you have a lot of other journals who actually have books already. And then when you contact them, they will say, okay, we've got a list here. Could you choose one from the list? And we will publish it once you're done. And the advantages with the option 2 is that you don't have to buy the book or get it from a library. Often they will send you what we call a desk copy. So they have free copies available, and they'll send you a desk copy. And then you'll be able to, you get a free book, and then you do the review, and then you publish it. And normally, as I said, they give you 3 months. So you're not exactly working within tight deadlines. If you're interested in this in the next coming months or even beyond this course, I'm always very happy to assist people with the final draft of a book review. So if you need a critical reader and you want help as you finish, definitely you could always reach out to me again, and I could happy to advise you on the final copy edit of a book review. But it is really important. It's a big step. I think you should consider it. Okay, on to now dissemination of findings. So on here, first of all, I say that often the dissemination of finding isn't as haphazard and accidental as we think. It's a bit of a myth to think that, okay, we just do a study, we do a study, we write it up, and then we look for publishers. We actually don't do that very often. What you're going to see out there is that often we actually have a journal in mind when we start writing, because we have to be pragmatic. We don't want to lose time, and we really are already thinking about a readership when we start. Therefore, we're reading about a journal that tackles this readership, was useful to this readership, and therefore we may not have selected the exact journal, but we probably have one or two in mind that we actually want to send the study to. So again, this should demystify this process for you. It is not a sort of a blind process of sending your paper out. Usually you wrote it thinking, okay, I'm going to submit here, or I'm going to submit here, and then you send it, and when it's finished. The process when you send it to a review, I've said this already, but I'll mention again, the editor receives it, the editor does a first filtering, which is very superficial. They basically just looked at the topic kind of fits the journal mission and the journal interest. If it does, then it's sent to two reviewers for what we call double peer review. And once the review come in, you get the recommendation. It nearly always requires that you do revisions. You do the revisions, you send it in again. So this could be again in 2-3 months. And then it is then either approved or in the end rejected, and then it goes to publication. And just before you go to publication, the journal is actually a group of academics, but the journal actually is published by an editing house. So eventually it switches from the editorial board to the actual publishing house. So just before it goes to press, normally it's a bit of a panic. You get this final print about usually 48 hours before it comes out. It's actually a bit of a panic when you've never had it done before. Everyone always panics. The publisher will do a very, very, very tight editorial. So they're not bothered about content. They're not going to give you any feedback about content, but they will go through every comma, every inconsistency, every in-text citation that is wrong. Often we carry references in our bibliography that are not actually completely correct. They will find these discrepancies. They will ask you very quickly to correct all this and to actually finalize. Normally, you only have 48 hours between the time when you get that final draft in. It can be really daunting, as you might have 100 edits, but often these edits, once you open, it's commas, full marks, little typographical errors, and mostly confirming errors in the references. Often they've found the rectification, but they're going to ask you for your okay before they make the change, because it's your text. They don't want to make the text unilaterally. And then it goes to publication. So that's how we normally function. We have a journal in mind. We also often work with a specific journal in mind. So what you want to see as well is what we call special issues. So journals could have a broad topic, but then they will have a special issue, and they may say, this week, a certain journal wants to look specifically at, technology in the classroom, or specifically phone use in the classroom, or another, journal is going to look at the impact of COVID, on their topic, and those special issues come up fairly frequently. We as academics really like special issues because it gives you a much, much higher rate of success, because they're looking for something so narrow and so specific that if you write to purpose, if you write in that topic, you're very likely to be selected, because they are going to be rushed, they're going to be working very quickly, and they want a full edition that fits that specific theme. So a lot of us in the field will like special issues and look out for them. And then you actually write to request almost, right? Because you see this topic come up, and then you're going to do a study for this journal issue because it's actually something you're interested in and something that would fit your timeline. So in these cases, it's even more so even less random, if you wish, even less haphazard, because really when you're writing for a journal special edition. So you know exactly what they're looking for, and you're fitting your study to really be publishable there. That's just to increase your chances, and a lot of us do that. When you choose a journal, the other thing that we must demystify is that we do a lot of fitting a piece to the journal. A journal will normally give you a much better chance of being accepted if you are actually referencing other studies that have been published in this journal. And that's another reason why it's not random, because in your references, in your bibliography, often you will tackle a journal. If I want to publish in a journal, I will normally make sure I've got at least 4 or 5 current or very up-to-date studies that have been published in this journal, because everyone likes pat in the back, right? The journal feels, okay, you are actually familiar with this journal, you've read other stuff that's published in this journal, you understand what this journal is about. So it's kind of a confirmation that you're really working within this field, within these specific colleagues and peers in this interest group, and you fit in. So it's another aspect that must be demystified. I think we've covered everything there. So there are also other things that you need to look at is that we've looked at credibility of sources. They are the double peer reviewed international journals. There is, by the way, an index of accreditation, an index of visibility. So it's an index of sort of credibility. It is becoming more and more challenged because a lot of people now are rebelling against the notion of the journal publication, because they are, we give the copyrights away. When you sign off the study to your journal, you give your copyright away. So it's no longer yours, to the point that you can't actually share it with people. So if your study is accepted by a journal and published by a journal, you cannot post it somewhere. You cannot share it with people. It's not yours, it's the journal's. And then the journals charge the libraries, and they charge an awful lot of money for people to access those pieces. So as part of a wider reflection around social justice, equity, the problems of publication and neoliberalism, again, this market sort of business model, there's a lot of academics which are rebelling against that. So as we've discussed, you have a lot more people now publishing in open access journals. Open access journals are going to be very different. You may find them a bit wary because sometimes they are seen as predatory, because they will ask that you pay. So sometimes you pay $200, $300, $500 to be published. But really, it is actually not predatory. Well, there are some predatory. Okay, there's definitely a few journals out there that are sort of suspicious and just charge you to publish anything. But a lot of very good journals now that are double blind reviewed are open access, and therefore require that you pay for publication. But a lot of people prefer that in a way now in the 21st century, because you might pay $500. So first of all, as academics, we normally have a little fund. We get some sort of stipend depending on what campus you work, but some sort of publication stipend. Or rather, you get what's called an administrative stipend. So it's there for you to pay small expenses, and you can definitely pay your publication cost out of that. So it doesn't come out of your pocket, it comes out of your sort of admin stipend. And it often means in open access that you retain the copyright. So you pay $300, but you are published through this vehicle, and then you retain the copyright, which is much more interesting because you can share it with people, you can use it as you wish. It gives you the visibility, but doesn't lock it into these journals that can be inaccessible. So that's another avenue for dissemination, which is slightly different. You also need to think of conference. You are likely, again, as a young graduate, I encourage you before your master's is finished to try and put forward a conference presentation somewhere, particularly in a Canadian, so a pan-Canadian conference, because that's going to, again, lock you into a community of practice with scholars, young scholars like yourself who are interested in a specific area. And it doesn't always require that you necessarily have, a study finished. Often people will present a study idea or a work in progress, or something that they've begun, or they're working in, or maybe they're involved in practice, and then they will publish, or they'll present a paper explaining that aspect of the practice, and explaining that they are about to write an article on this. So it's a good way in for you as young scholars, and I really encourage you to try and look around for conferences that you might want to present something at. Now, it's going to be daunting. I remember my first conference. You're in the middle in front of a lot of people. Your voice tightens. You're a bit scared, but it is a huge part of becoming a scholar. And you're doing this masters because you want to become scholars, even if you remain scholar practitioners. So conference presentation is going to be a huge part of what you bring forward. To some extent, if you remain interested in your initial question for this course, you might want to continue building this, and then eventually put it forward at a conference somewhere and actually go with it, because you've done a lot of work. You've got a literature review. You could present it at work in progress. You're not doing it yet, but you're about to do it, right? And you're presenting it at conference. Conference presentation are very important because you always have 5-10 minutes of what we call questions, but really those are peer reviews. So people are going to actually offer commentaries, and often those commentaries are going to be really good because you can refine your idea before you continue and before you go to data collection. So often it's a very, very important process. In conferences, you have two modes. conference presentation, live presentation, usually they 20-25 minutes. I recommend that you do this at least once. But even an easier way to get in is what we call the poster presentation. So the poster presentation is pretty much a poster, normally in A3, which would include your proposal, so the different aspects of your proposal. And then usually that is done either during the drinks reception or some of the lunches in the registration area of a conference. And then all these young scholars are presenting their proposals. And that is good too, because people walk around with a sandwich and a glass of wine and they read your poster and they interact with you and they might give you some feedback. Have you thought about this text? Have you heard about this? Or have you thought about doing this in your methodology? So often that is actually completely work in progress, literally at the stage that you're in with your proposal. And yet you get a conference presentation, so you can list it in your CV, you get the feedback from your peers, and again, it enables you to move forward. Advantage of going to a conference is that it's another avenue for dissemination because we have what we call conference proceedings. So not all conferences, but many conferences will have some sort of vehicle at the end that enables you to publish what you have presented, or even your poster session. So you would write up the paper. It is reviewed, but normally it's not double blind reviewed. So sometimes it's reviewed by a committee or reviewed by one single editor. So in your CV, you don't count it as double peer reviewed, but you count it as other publications. And those are a lot easier to get out. So again, as a young scholar, it's something that you might want to do. It's a good way of getting a publication out. It's not a double peer review publication, but it still counts in your CV and still monitored for jobs, etc. And yeah, so that's again is dissemination. And most of you, I think, when you've done your literature review, will have encountered some conference proceedings, and it's still a credible source, and it gets cited as well. So it's a good way to get your foot in the door and get in the world of scientific publication. So we've looked at that. The next aspect is the networking part. So I think it's important that you realize that we are very much, again, in a neoliberal environment, in a commercial sort of business-like model in education, as in every other aspect of public life. And you have an active role in getting the work to your readership. So again, sometimes it's a bit of a myth for young scholars who think, okay, I'm finished now, that's it, it's sent to publication. The first email you will get from the journal is usually 50 complimentary copies of your article. So you can share, you've given up copyright, but often they do give you a bit of a gift. They give you something like 25 or 50 what we call digital access. So it's a link that will allow the first 25 people or the first 50 people to access your article for free. It's a branding exercise. Now, they don't do that. They ask you to do that. So the branding and the visibility is actually your job. So it's important in the objectives of this course to see that our job doesn't stop when we write and we publish. Our job continues to getting the work and disseminating those findings all the way to the people who should read them. Now, a huge part of this now has become the importance of creating a social media presence. As academics, you are expected to create a social media presence. It's the old adage that I think I've already used at the beginning. If a tree falls in the forest and no one hears it, did it really happen? Well, if someone wrote a journal article but no one ever read it, did it really matter? No, it didn't matter. So really, all the work that you've done, it would be a bit silly if you stop there, because really the purpose is that people read it, and that is not going to be the publisher's job. That's going to be your job. So an inherent part of a young scholar, young academic's career is to create social media presence. So there are lots of different avenues in which you can do that. I really encourage you as part of this course to also think now of creating your social media presence, because again, you will need it at the end of your course when you get to your first conference or your first book review or your first study, maybe if you're lucky. But by then it'll be too late, because it's not the kind of thing that you can create overnight. So it's really important that you see this as a process that you need to do now, because it will take you 2 years to get some sort of social and media presence as an academic. And that's when you'll need it, and that's when it will be available to you, because you have grown it literally like a plant. You water it slowly and eventually you get that. So there are several recognized credible avenues. So first of all, there's the obvious one, LinkedIn. I don't necessarily like LinkedIn. It's more professional than in terms of academic. There is a section LinkedIn that allows you to list your publications, but to be honest, not many people look at that. So it's kind of out of date now. LinkedIn is more for job search than for the purpose of academic visibility. The main one is called ResearchGate. So I really encourage you to go and create a profile on ResearchGate. ResearchGate is a sort of Facebook for academics, and it allows you to follow people, and people can follow you back. Academics which are well established are publishing and are presenting their papers there. They will list their conference presentation. They will list their full publication. They will list their projects that are in the works. It is really useful, ResearchGate, because once you are present and connected and you follow a few people, often people will be allowed by the publishers to add what they call preprints. So, for example, if there's a paper that I finished and that's it, it's gone to the publishers, it will be published in 2022, but I know it's going ahead. In the meantime, I'm allowed to share the preprint under certain restrictions. So the preprint is not your final draft. You'll have to go back and take a draft before the revisions were done, but still a very good draft of what eventually will be published. So the advantage is that those things are shared on ResearchGate, and you are going to be able to get access to very, very contemporary, very up-to-date research before it even hits the journal. So you're going to be able to cite it literally as it comes out. So, in this effort to stay up to date, if you're looking for 21 and very quickly 22 research, you are going to find it on ResearchGate before you find it in the journals themselves. So I really recommend that you sort of join ResearchGate. ResearchGate requires that you have an affiliation, so you will be able to join on the UPI page. You don't just float on ResearchGate, you are automatically affiliated with the institution that you're in. But as graduate students, you can register. And actually, there's a lot of master students at UPI which are registered in ResearchGate, and they already have a presence. You will be able to follow people. You will be at the beginning what we call a lurker in social media. A lurker is a technical term, really, in science to describe people who may be present but don't post, but still follow. So they still draw a lot from the conversations they listen to, etc. ResearchGate is really, really popular. It also has a built-in index, so people are rated on the amount of. There's an algorithm, and the algorithm is a combination of how much you produce in terms of output in research, how much people are requesting your preprints, etc., by direct contact, to what extent you are cited. So the algorithm will pick up in literature how many times you're cited and your papers are cited. And that ends up giving a sort of visibility index, right? Which is actually very important because when you go for a job as an academic, they will look at your ResearchGate index. So really, as we talked about when we started talking about credibility now is not so much about the substance of the work you do. Yeah, definitely. But it's not judged solely on the merit of the piece itself. It's judged on its relevance to the field. And the relevance to the field is made up in great part of how many people are citing you, how many people are reading you, how many people are talking about you. So, we are in context. The substantial nature of what you do is not purely objective. It's in context, and it relates to how many people actually do look at your stuff and use your stuff. The other one is Twitter. Twitter obviously can be, some people love it and hate it. I use Twitter solely for academic work. I don't use it for personal, personal issues. I find that overcomes a lot of the problem because of the trolling and the sort of divisive nature of Twitter. I think you hit a lot of that when you use it for personal use because it's going to connect you with public debate, social outcry, all this. But if you use it solely for work and you only connect with people who are connected, who are doing the work that you're looking at in academia, you can actually train the algorithm to only feed you relevant academic material. So I've been on Twitter for quite a few years. Profile is kind of growing. I think I can't remember how many followers I have, maybe 1,500 or something. I follow about 3,000 people, only academics and only people working in research. And anything I get on my feed is actually purely work related. I don't get anything else. So you can train your Twitter algorithm to actually do what you want it to do. If you are using Twitter but using for family and general sort of pop culture news, but you want to change that, I recommend you create two accounts. Simply use your UPI address to create a separate account and use that only for work. And I think you'll find that really useful. There's a lot of very, very, very good professional stuff out there. If I publish something, the first place I will mention it is on Twitter. And I can tell you that the social media avenue gets me the most readers immediately is Twitter. It's not the other avenues. So it's really, really worth looking at. Otherwise, you have academia.edu. So academia.edu. Academia.edu is a sort of a Facebook, truly as a Facebook of academics. So it functions very much in the same way. You can actually access academia via Facebook. You don't need to create a separate profile. It will give you entrance through it. I don't know if it's a Facebook product, but I think it is. It's got its pros and cons. It's not bad. It's not bad because, again, if you put your preprints and your work, a lot of people through Google will hit it on academia. It's got a pretty good sort of searchability on Google. It's a pretty good way to make sure, as an academic, make sure that your work gets out there. My order of priority, I would normally list on ResearchGate, then I'd go to Twitter, then I would eventually, if I have the time, go back to academia and fill the gaps there and list that there. It's not the most popular way to get people to access your material, but it is a good longitudinal way. People will eventually get there. Google will get them to the academia presence that you have. Google actually tells you when people hit your work through academia, so you do see it as well. It gives you a sort of tally every month of how many people found you on academia through Google, so you're able to assess that. Academia is they're trying desperately to make you buy the premium version, which is the paying version. Don't buy that. I'm not paying for it. I just got a free version, which is perfectly adequate. The only thing that is different with the free version is that you can't see certain features. So, for example, I'll get a flag that someone has cited me, but I can't see who cited me. I'd have to pay the premium version to see who cited me. And that's totally fine. You don't need that information. So, Academia Edu is good. The presentation isn't bad, again, because you can follow a lot of people. Again, as a social media lurker, you can follow a lot of people. You can go into your field of interest. Even you could literally go into your literature review, take all the authors that you've cited, and you could follow them on Academia. And then you will get updates and notification every time they publish something else and they've got a paper out. So it's very useful in that sense because you don't have to go through Library Index and look for it. It lands in your inbox and lands on your wall on Academia, and you see what these people are publishing. So very useful. It's definitely worth having a look at. But anyway, all of that work is your work. So again, really stress the importance of creating a social media presence as an academic and young scholar. Don't leave it till later. Consider it now. It takes a long time to grow. So when you need it, it'll be too late. You need to grow it now so that when you need it eventually, it's there. It is not separate from your academic life. It is very tightly linked into all the work that you do in this course and this program. It is, in this neoliberal environment, part of your job. It's part of how you join a community of scholars, find like-minded people who work on the same work, and make sure that your work reaches them and their work reaches you. So it is part of this dissemination effort that we're talking in this unit. So the only forum for this section will be just an open forum. If you have any questions about dissemination or anything I've mentioned, pop it in the forum, and I'll tackle it between now and Thursday. And then for the rest of the week, it will be looking at after the Collaborate session. It'll be looking at theory, and we'll see if you have questions about theory. So I hope you found this section pragmatic but interesting. Keep it in mind because, again, I think a great problem graduate students is they see the work of research and the work of publication as a finite process. I just start and I finish here. It never is. Your job starts with looking at the readership, looking at contemporary issues before you even begin selecting a question and designing it. And then at the end, your job doesn't finish there. It loops back to that readership that you identify and making sure that you ensure and try your hardest to make sure that those findings actually reach the people who it might be interesting to or for. That's it. So I'll leave you for that, and have a good beginning of the week, and I will see you at the Collaborate session.